It was a cloudy afternoon in Savannah when Linda received the connection she never expected. Her father, Mr. Charles Donovan, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. She dropped her kitchen apron, smelling of apples and cinnamon, and looked up at the sky with tears in her eyes. She wasn't just crying for her father's death, but for everything that still needed to be said, and now never would be. What she didn't know was that this loss would open much deeper wounds. The family home, where she'd grown up amid porch swings and fresh milk in the morning, was now the scene of a bittersweet reunion. Her older brother, Robert, stood there, wearing a dark suit and a too-quiet smile. Since their youth, he'd always been their father's favorite, or at least that's how Linda felt. But today, something about his posture seemed rehearsed, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, back to the story. The lawyer arrived late and with an envelope in his hands. But there was one strange detail. It wasn't the envelope Linda recognized from the will her father had kept in the basement safe. When the document was unsealed, the silence in the room was crushing. The entire inheritance, every penny, would go to Robert. Nothing was left to Linda. Not her mother's rocking chair, not the family Bible, not even the pearl necklace inherited from her grandmother. Linda gasped. Not from the material loss, but from the absence of remembrance, of recognition, of love. And there, in front of everyone, she knew something was wrong. Robert, in a low voice, said it was father's wish. But Linda clearly remembered her last conversation with Mr. Charles. He had assured her that she would receive half the house, the antique furniture, and that nothing would be unfair. And more than that, he had promised that God's justice always prevails, even when human justice fails. Those words now echoed like a prophetic whisper in her mind. The guests left, and Linda sat on the coffee-stained sofa, staring at the unlit fireplace. Memories came flooding back, the time she'd cared for her father during his surgery, the Christmas she'd been alone because Robert chose to travel to Colorado. It was as if time had reversed priorities, leaving behind those who mattered most. She knew the story couldn't end there. The next day, she decided to visit her father's old room. Everything was in the same place. The wall clock still ticked rhythmically, and the scent of mint in the air made her smile, even though her heart was heavy. That's when she saw the crooked shelf, the same one her father said was full of secrets. As she pulled out a red-covered book, a small key fell to the floor. It was a safe deposit box key. The safe was in the basement, behind a shelf of groceries. No one had touched it since her mother left years before. Linda walked down the stairs slowly, feeling the cold creep up her legs. The key fitted easily. Inside was a yellowed envelope, handwritten with her name, "To my dear daughter Linda, should anything happen to me." Her hands were shaking. She opened the envelope right there, sitting on the cold cement floor. Inside was a letter. Her father explained that he had written a new will, nullifying the old one. He said he realized past mistakes and that it was time to repair what pride had torn apart. But there was a problem. He didn't know if he would have time to take this new document to the notary. Linda felt a lump in her throat. She looked at the paper and then up, as if she could see her father between the ceiling boards. That letter was the greatest inheritance she could have received, recognition. But at the same time, it was a double-edged sword. Without official registration, it would be word for word. And she knew Robert would never give in without a fight. Deep down, he had always been greedier than he let on. Linda decided to seek out the family lawyer, the same one who had been at the wake. When she arrived at the office, she noticed something strange. The man seemed nervous, as if he were waiting for her. Before she could even show him the letter, he sighed deeply and said, "There's something you need to know." That made her world spin for a second. She clutched her purse and waited. The lawyer said that, days before his father's death, Robert appeared with an urgent document, asking that it be used in case old Charles's weakened heart failed. It was the will that had been read at the wake. But the lawyer, under pressure, had been suspicious. He said he kept a digital copy of another document he had received in the mail weeks earlier, supposedly sent by Charles himself. Linda swallowed hard. She knew her father had written something more recent. But this was more than confirmation. It was proof that her brother had acted prematurely, tampering with documents. The lawyer said he feared reprisals, but now, seeing the letter in his hands, he felt more confident speaking out. Linda took a deep breath and said, "We will seek justice. Not for money. For truth." As she walked home, she felt a strength she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if faith had risen from the ashes. She remembered Proverbs 16 verse 8, "Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without righteousness." And with that, she resolved that she would not rest until her father's name was honored, and hers as well. But the story was far from over. That night, while sorting through old documents in a wooden box, she found an old photograph. It was her father, still young, embracing a woman she didn't recognize. And behind the photo, a note, "To Margot, with eternal love." Linda froze. Who was Margot? And why had her father kept this photo a secret? This discovery opened a new mystery, one that would lead her to truths she never imagined. And it was only the beginning. For the name Margot would come up again at the most unexpected moment, at the wake. And when this woman walked through the door, wearing a blue dress and holding a small Bible in her hands, everything changed. The car's wheels squeaked against the gravel driveway as Linda drove back to the old farmhouse where she grew up. The same wooden gate creaked as before, and the smell of hay in the air made her heart race. It was like stepping into an old dream, or perhaps a dormant nightmare. Every corner of the place held a piece of her childhood, but now everything seemed fraught with unanswered questions. The wind blew hard, as if whispering, "You don't know everything yet." The porch, where her mother sewed in the afternoon sun, was covered in dry leaves. Linda ran her fingers over the wooden railing, remembering the time she'd played teacher to the barn cats. The broken swing still swayed on its own, driven by the breeze and longing. She sat for a moment, closed her eyes, and let the past wash over her. It was impossible to hold back the tears. Memories came in waves, the smell of her mother's bread, the bark of old Buddy, her father's laughter as he fixed the radio antenna. But now, all of this blended into the heavy silence of absence. The chickens were gone, the barn was empty, and the field seemed smaller. Linda knew she had returned not just to remember, but to understand. Something about this land held more than mere memories. He entered the house, where wooden floors creaked beneath his feet. In the living room, he saw the old clock stopped at 3:45, as if time had frozen at some momentous moment. And suddenly, a quote from his mother came to mind, "Time doesn't stop, but truth always waits for the right time." It made her shiver. Linda began searching for something. She didn't know what, but she felt she had to find it. In the attic, among boxes of old clothes and toys, she found a photo album she'd never seen before. The first few pages showed ordinary scenes, birthdays, picnics, harvests. But on page 22, something caught her eye, a photo of her father smiling next to a woman who wasn't her mother, in front of that same barn. In the photo, the woman wore a heart necklace identical to the one Linda had inherited without explanation. He sat on the wooden floor and flipped through the rest of the album. More photos of the same woman, always smiling, always beside her father. On the back of one of the pictures was written, "Margot, Autumn 1972. The name made her freeze. It was the same name he'd found written on the back of the photo hidden in the wooden box. And then, like a bolt of lightning, he realized, the farm wasn't just the setting for her childhood. It was the stage for a parallel story she'd never known existed. He ran down to the basement. There was a locked cabinet that Dad never let anyone open. He forced the lock and heard a sharp click. Inside, he found an old suitcase. Opening it, he smelled musty mustiness mixed with cheap perfume. Letters, dozens of them, all signed by Margot. Some spoke of love, others of longing, and one, the last, said, "Promise me you'll tell her the truth someday." The last letter was folded inside a book of Psalms. Linda read aloud, "The Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." She couldn't help but cry. That verse seemed to have been written for her. The letter also said that Margot knew she couldn't stay, that she accepted her place in silence, but that one day, everything would come to light. Linda took everything to the porch, sat facing the sunset, and fell silent. The field before her was no longer just dirt. It was sacred ground, where truths had been buried. A strange sensation washed over her, as if she were being watched. She turned slowly and, in the distance, saw a figure. Someone on horseback, standing on the hill, hat on. When she blinked, the figure vanished. It could have been imagination, or not. On the farm, they said the field had a memory of its own. That old things returned when the time was right. Linda went inside and called her cousin, Emma, who lived in Tennessee. She told her what she had found, and Emma was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I knew this would happen someday. I just didn't know it would be you who discovered it." Emma explained that as a child, she had overheard a conversation between her mother and Mr. Charles. They spoke of a woman named Margot who lived in Charleston and who had to give up everything for appearances. She also said that she once saw Linda's father crying alone on the porch, holding a letter. And that after that day, he was never the same. This revelation left Linda shaken. Her father wasn't just a strict man who tended the farm with a firm hand. He was also a man torn between two worlds, and perhaps between two loves. And she, unbeknownst to herself, carried in her blood the echo of a story never told. She began to suspect that Margot might be much more than a past lover. Perhaps she was part of the family. The wind blew hard again that afternoon, and with it came the memory of a story her mother had told about a box buried in the garden, holding secrets kept for the right time. Linda ran to the mango tree at the back, where her mother planted sunflowers. She began digging with her hands, as if the earth had called to her. And then, she heard the metallic sound. He carefully brushed away the dirt and took out a heavy, rusty metal box. Inside were more letters, this time from his mother. And in one of them, a sentence changed everything. "Linda, if you ever meet Margot, look into her eyes. You'll understand what I didn't even have the courage to say." It was the beginning of a new mystery, but also the certainty that his mother had known all along. The farm transformed with each discovery. And, little by little, what seemed like a peaceful past revealed itself as a minefield of secrets. Linda felt that God was guiding her, even through the pain. And she always remembered what her mother said, "No matter how long it takes, the truth always finds a way." What she didn't imagine was that the truth would come riding, literally, to meet her. Robert's silence that morning was deafening. He sat at the kitchen table, his coffee cup untouched, staring into space. Linda entered slowly, her eyes still scarred from a sleepless night. Neither of them said a word for long minutes. It was as if an invisible battlefield were raging between them. She wondered what he knew, and what he was still hiding. Since returning to the farm, Robert seemed more restless. He looked away, avoided long conversations, and always found an excuse to leave. When Linda tried to talk about Margot's letters, he simply said, "Don't stir up the past, Linda. Some things should stay buried." But she knew there was more to that statement than fear. There was guilt lurking beneath the surface. One day, while he was away, Linda decided to take a look at her father's workshop, where Robert spent hours locked away. The place was almost intact, as if no one had touched it since the 1980s. The tools were organized with surgical precision. But something caught her eye, a wooden box engraved with a symbol, the same symbol that appeared in Margot's letters. It was like a secret signature. The box was locked, but Linda knew she'd seen that key before. She spent hours rummaging through the house until, lifting the mattress in her father's room, she found a small envelope. Inside, a rusty key tied with a red ribbon. Trembling, she returned to the workshop, unlocked the box, and what she found there changed the course of history. It was a diary. Not her father's, but Margot's. The pages were yellowed, and the smell of old paper filled the air. In the diary, Margot recounted frequent visits to the farm, nights spent hiding in the barn, and most importantly, a promise Charles had made to officially recognize the fruit of his love. Linda's eyes widened. Fruit. Love. She turned a few more pages and felt the ground disappear. Margot was pregnant. The diary ended abruptly with a sentence, "Tomorrow, he'll tell the family everything." But what Linda knew was that never happened. Her father remained silent. Her mother never mentioned it. And Robert was there the whole time. Did he know? Could it be that? Linda stopped. A terrible thought crossed her mind. What if Robert had done something to stop it? That night, she left the diary on the kitchen table. When she woke in the morning, the diary was gone. She ran to Robert's room, but he wasn't there. The car was gone too. It was as if he knew the truth was coming out. And once again, he had fled. But this time, Linda wouldn't let the past be buried without a fight. She decided to go to the registry office in the neighboring town, where her father used to register old documents. On the way, she said a silent prayer, asking God to enlighten her. She remembered Jeremiah 29 verse 13, "You will seek me and find me, when you search for me with all your heart." When she arrived, she asked the clerk about the records for the name Margot Thompson. What she heard took her breath away. There was, in fact, an old record, an unfinished adoption document, in which Mr. Charles requested custody of a child named Grace. But the process was halted for unspecified personal reasons. Linda was stunned. Grace. The name was familiar. She searched her childhood memories and remembered a girl with braids who would occasionally appear at the farm, claiming to be Charleston's cousin. She returned home with her heart racing. When she arrived, she found Robert sitting on the porch, holding the diary in his hands. He was crying. For the first time in years, Linda saw her brother vulnerable. She sat beside him and waited. Robert, his voice hoarse, said, "I tried to stop it. I was just a boy, but when I found out, I begged him to forget. I didn't want to share you with anyone." He confessed that he found the diary weeks before his father's death, that he learned of Grace's existence, and that he was in despair. "I felt like everything we had built would crumble, that our family would end." Linda looked him in the eye and replied firmly, "Robert, the family ended the moment the truth was buried." He didn't answer. Linda took a deep breath and said she already knew about the adoption process. And now, she needed to find Grace. Robert hesitated for a second, then said, "She's back. She's in town. She came to the wake. She wore a blue dress." Linda's heart raced. It was her. The mysterious woman who appeared and disappeared at the ceremony was Grace. Linda was in shock. The sister she never knew she had been nearby all along. And now, he knew he had to find her. But where to begin? And did Grace want to be found? Or was she also harboring hurt feelings from that buried past? Linda returned to her mother's room searching for clues, and found more than she bargained for. Inside a cookbook was a letter with a Charleston address and a note, "For when the time is right." It was from her mother. And on the envelope, a delicately written sentence, "Don't judge your father, daughter. He tried, but we don't always have the strength to do the right thing." Linda wept silently, feeling the weight of the story unfold like a quilt made of secrets and regrets. She packed her bags and decided she would leave the next day. She needed to look into the eyes of the woman in the blue dress. She needed to know what happened to Grace, and why her father never had the courage to tell her the truth. Deep down, she felt it wasn't just about inheritance or justice. It was about forgiveness. And maybe, redemption. Charles Donovan's wake was silent, somber, marked by low glances and murmurs. Contained. The chapel in Macon was decorated with white lilies, as he had requested, and the sweet scent of the flowers mingled with the tension in the air. Linda sat in the front row, holding an embroidered handkerchief of her mother's. She stared at the closed casket, unable to contain the feeling that there was still something that needed to be said. But then, the door opened. Everyone turned. A woman walked in, her steps firm, as if carrying decades of longing on her shoulders. She wore a navy blue dress and clutched a small Bible to her chest. Her gray hair was tied back in a low bun, and there was something familiar in her eyes. Linda froze. That was the woman in the photo. That was Margot. Her heart began to pound. Margot walked to the coffin, knelt, and made the sign of the cross. He whispered a prayer no one could hear, then rose gracefully and looked at Linda. The look lasted only a few seconds, but it was like an avalanche of emotions. Linda felt the breath leave her lungs. She stood slowly and walked toward the woman, unsure of what to say. The two stared at each other in silence. Margot smiled slightly and said, "You have his eyes." Linda didn't know what to say. Her body trembled, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In the background, the guests whispered, trying to understand who this stranger was who had entered so boldly. But Linda didn't care. There was something in that moment that transcended explanation. "You're Margot?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. Margot nodded. "And you're Linda." That confirmed everything. Linda felt heat rise to her cheeks. Suddenly, the wake became the stage for a silent revelation. The two women stepped away from the crowd and into the chapel's side garden, where the sound of leaves rustling in the wind helped them gather their thoughts. It was time to hear the truth. Margot began by telling how she met Charles. "It was the summer of '69, in Savannah. I was working in a dental office, and he came to fix the printer." She smiled, remembering. "At first, it was just friendship. Then, my heart spoke louder." Linda listened to every word as if unearthing a treasure. "But he was married. I was too much of a coward to destroy a family." Linda asked about Grace, and Margot's expression changed. Her eyes filled with tears. "She was born in Charleston. Charles was present at the birth. He wanted to take her to the farm, raise her with you. But your mother found out. And she made a deal with him. She would raise you, but he could never bring Grace home." The pain in her words was palpable. Margot revealed that Grace had been raised by a distant cousin, and that Charles sent her money every month. "He never stopped loving you both. But he lived in a state of conflict, until his last day." Linda felt the ground give way beneath her feet. So many years of silence, so many lost opportunities. But something inside her told her it was time to forgive. After all, not every heart can choose between love and obligation. Margot handed Linda an envelope. "He wrote this for you. But he didn't have the courage to give it to you." Linda opened it slowly. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it is because the truth has finally found its way." The rest of the letter was a plea for forgiveness, a father's outburst of regret for his choices. Linda wept unabashedly. At the end of the letter, one sentence stood out: "Forgive your father, as your heavenly Father forgives his children." Linda felt a peace fill her chest. It was as if she had finally found the key that would unlock not only the secrets of her past, but the chains of her own heart. And in that moment, she knew she needed to know Grace, not as a stranger, but as a sister. "Did she come?" she asked. Margot nodded. "She was here, sitting in the back. She left before the end. She said she didn't want to cause any pain." Linda swallowed. Her sister had been just a few feet away and had left without revealing herself. "Do you know where she is now?" Margot hesitated for a moment, then handed her a card with an address in Asheville. "She's trying to figure it all out. But she's scared." Linda thanked her and took the older woman's hand. "You did what you could." Margot squeezed back and said, "And now, you can do what he didn't have the courage to do." The two embraced, and it was as if time had moved backward. Two stories separated by silence, united by pain and love. In the background, the chapel bells rang, announcing that the wake was over. Robert appeared outside, watching from afar. His gaze was hard, but also filled with something Linda couldn't name. Regret, perhaps. He approached, but said nothing. He simply looked at Margot, then at the letter in his sister's hands, and left silently. Linda knew he, too, would have his journey of reconciliation, in his own way, in his own time. On the way home, Linda drove in silence. Beside her, the passenger seat was empty, but in her heart, she felt as if someone were there. It was her father. It was God. It was the love that never dies. She remembered Romans 5, verse 5, "God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." And with that certainty, she decided, it was time to go to Asheville. But there was something she didn't know yet. Grace was closer than she'd imagined. Much closer. And when they met again, both of their lives would change forever. Linda arrived in Asheville with her heart pounding. The address Margot had given her led to a small white house with a simple garden, surrounded by faded rose bushes. The place seemed too quiet, as if it wanted to protect its inhabitants. She parked the car and stood there for long minutes, trying to gather her courage. Each heartbeat seemed louder than the last. It was now or never. Before he went downstairs, he said a simple prayer. "Lord, may the truth bring healing. May I speak with love, even if it hurts." She took a deep breath, walked to the porch, and rang the doorbell. The metallic sound echoed through the house. Nothing. She rang again. After a minute, the door opened. It was her. Grace. Straight hair, serene green eyes, features that vaguely resembled her father. They both stood there, staring at each other, unsure of what to say. "Hi. I'm Linda." The answer came softly, almost a whisper. "I know." Grace made room and let her sister in. The atmosphere was tense, but charged with something almost indescribable, silent recognition. They sat at the table, and Linda pulled from her purse a cardboard box containing Margot's diary, her father's letter, and, most importantly, a hidden collection of letters she'd found in the back of her mother's closet. The letters were addressed to Margot, but some were returned. Others were never sent. Written by Charles himself. "My heart is torn," read one. "You and Grace are a part of me, even if I live as if they weren't." Another contained a heartbreaking outburst. "I tried to tell Linda, but the guilt paralyzed me. Maybe she'll hate me one day. But God knows I tried." Grace read silently, her eyes brimming with tears. Linda merely watched. She sensed this wasn't the time for accusations, only for listening. One of the letters, dated 1982, contained a handwritten scripture: "Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities." Psalm 51, verse 9. The father knew he had sinned, but he also sought redemption. "He visited me twice," Grace said, her voice breaking. "The last time was when I was 18. He took me to a lake, read the Bible with me, and cried. He said he had failed. That I was part of the story, but a part he didn't know how to tell." Linda held her sister's hand. "He wrote me a letter that never reached me. But now, reading these, I feel as if he has." The two spent hours reading each line. Each letter felt like a desperate attempt to mend what was broken. Charles wasn't a perfect man. He was weak, yes. But he was a man who tried, who loved in silence, who sought in God the strength he lacked in his flesh. "You know what's strangest?" Grace said with a sad smile. "Even after everything, I never stopped calling him Dad in my prayers." Linda smiled back. "I think it's because the faith that sustains us doesn't require explanations. It just requires surrender." And in that moment, the past lost some of its weight. Love began to stitch together the torn edges of history. The two sisters embraced, and it was as if time had turned back, not to change mistakes, but to give new meaning to what remained. Grace brought a box of more letters. These, kept by her mother, Margot. Some were replies, others, outbursts never sent. One said, "I don't expect you to accept me. But I hope one day you'll understand that adults get lost too. And that forgiveness is the only way to move on." Linda couldn't hold back her tears. This wasn't just about them. It was about all the women who were taught to swallow silence. Late that afternoon, Linda noticed an envelope separate from the others. It was addressed to her mother, Annabel. Charles's handwriting was firm, to the woman who was strong, even when she had reason to fall. It was a letter of confession and gratitude. He thanked her for raising Linda with love, even knowing about Grace's existence. And he apologized, not for loving Margot, but for not being strong enough to love both women as they deserved. Grace read the letter with teary eyes. "She never said anything bad about your mother to me. Quite the opposite. She always said that if there were any justice, they would both share the same crown in heaven." Linda laughed through her tears. "I think they both knew more than they let on." The letters revealed that Annabel and Margot even exchanged secret messages, with pain, yes, but also with mutual respect. Something rare and deeply human. As the sun set, the two sisters walked in the garden. Linda said, "He wasn't a hero. But he wasn't a villain either. He was human." Grace added, "And God uses ordinary people to show uncommon grace." The afternoon ended with silent prayer, hands joined, heads bowed, hearts finally beating the same rhythm. But there was still someone who didn't know the truth, Robert. And if there was one thing in the letters they hadn't yet discovered, it was the final clue that could change everything. A hidden confession, written on the back of a folded sheet of paper, that Linda would only discover hours later, when reviewing the papers at home. It was something not even Margot knew. Something that would reveal the real reason Charles had remained silent, and that would confront Robert with the greatest dilemma of his life. Night fell silent over the farm when Linda, back from Asheville, decided to climb up to the attic. Something inside her told her her mother had left more clues. She felt a restlessness in her chest, as if Annabel still had something to tell her, even from the other side of life. The dim light from the hanging lamp cast long shadows across the dusty walls. And there, among old boxes and antique blankets, she found a hardcover notebook. It was a diary. Her mother's. In firm, elegant handwriting, it began, "If my daughter ever finds this, let her know that silence isn't always cowardice. Sometimes, it's just protection." Linda clutched the diary to her chest. The scent of Annabel's floral perfume still lingered between the pages. She sat down on her childhood trunk and began to read. The words that followed would change everything she thought about her own mother. Charles loved Margot. I knew. It was the first line of raw truth. I found out by reading a letter left on the desk. I didn't cry that day. I just understood that love is sometimes divided, even when they promise exclusivity. Linda felt a lump in her throat. Her mother knew. She'd known all along. And yet, she chose to stay. To raise. To love. Annabel wrote about the day she saw Charles crying alone on the porch. He was holding a photograph. It was of a girl. "I knew it wasn't you, my daughter. But he said you were his own flesh and blood. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't let you grow up without a father, even if it cost me my pride." Linda couldn't hold back her tears. Her mother had chosen silent love. In the middle of the diary was a folded sheet of paper with a handwritten verse. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." 1 Corinthians 13 verse 7. It was a faithful portrait of her mother. A woman who endured betrayal, yes, but who never failed to instill dignity in every gesture. Linda began to understand silence differently, as a profound form of strength. Annabel also mentioned secret meetings with Margot. "She came to me once. I didn't hit her. I didn't yell. I just listened. We cried together. She told me she didn't want to steal anything, she just wanted her daughter to know her father loved her." Linda was shocked. The two women talked. They made peace. While she grew up with the idea that her mother was the victim and Margot the villain, the truth was far more complex, and infinitely more beautiful. Elsewhere in the journal, Annabel spoke directly to Linda. "Daughter, perhaps one day you will feel betrayed by me too, for never telling you. But I did this to protect you from early pain, and to give you time to grow in peace. I trusted that God would bring the truth when your heart was ready." Linda closed her eyes and let the prayer flow in the form of tears. She was ready now. Her mother also left instructions. She said that when the truth came out, Linda should seek out Grace. "She's a part of you. Even if she wasn't born under my roof, she was born under the same sky. And that's reason enough to love her." And at the end of the notebook, a surprise. A carefully folded letter addressed to Grace herself. Linda came down from the attic with her heart both broken and still under construction. That diary wasn't just a confession. It was a legacy. She sat on the porch, under the starry sky, and thanked God for the mother she'd had. A woman who didn't need public recognition to be a giant. And there, under the veil of night, she decided to deliver the letter to Grace in person. The next day, she drove to Asheville again. When she arrived, Grace was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes. Linda handed her the letter silently. Grace read it with trembling hands. "You won't believe it," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Your mother, she called me daughter." Linda smiled, her heart full. It's because she was a mother to everyone, even if the world didn't know it. That letter sealed something no inheritance could offer, the certainty of belonging. Grace, for the first time, felt she had a mother. And Linda, for the first time, understood what it meant to love unconditionally. It was a moment of profound healing, with the sound of birds in the background and the gentle breeze touching the sisters' hair. But there was one more open wound, and it had a name, Robert. Linda knew that until he faced the truth, peace would be incomplete. But how could she make him understand? How could she convince him that their lives would only make sense if justice came with forgiveness? The answer would come, curiously, from the very woman he'd tried so hard to erase from history, Margot. And she was about to do something even Linda couldn't imagine. Robert was never exactly charismatic. He grew up as the natural heir, always at his father's side, always having the last word. While Linda played with dolls and tended the chickens, he was trained to take over one day. But now, that same man was crumbling before his own ghosts. And what Linda didn't know was that her brother was hiding much more than secrets from the past. That morning, he appeared at the farmhouse door with red eyes and an envelope in his hands. "We need to talk," he said bluntly. Linda hesitated, but nodded. They sat in the kitchen, just like old times, but the mood was different. Robert placed the envelope on the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But I think you have a right to know." She stared at him, waiting for his next burst of truth. Inside the envelope were bank documents, old statements, and contracts. Sales contracts. Linda recognized the name of the farm immediately. "You sold the farm?" Her voice trailed off. Robert lowered his eyes. "Almost. I tried. A few months before Dad died. He was sick, the debt was high, I panicked." Linda froze. This was a betrayal. Not just to her family, but to her mother's memory, to her childhood, to everything. Robert explained that his father discovered the attempt and, instead of confronting him, made a new will with clauses that would prevent the sale without Linda's consent. It was the real will, the one Linda had never seen until she found the hidden letter. "He didn't disinherit me, but he stopped me. I was furious. And that's when I switched the papers. I took the old will and made it look like the official one." The confession struck Linda like a bolt of lightning. She stared at her brother as if she were a stranger. "You used our father's death to erase my existence?" Robert looked at her, tears streaming down his face. "I was afraid. Of losing you. Of losing everything. Of being nothing without this farm." He looked small. Fragile. Very different from the authoritarian brother he'd once been. But the pain didn't erase the disappointment. And that's when Margot appeared. Literally. She knocked on the door with a serene look in her eyes and an envelope in her hands. "Robert, your time has come." He looked at her as if seeing a ghost. "I came to bring you something Charles left for you. He asked me to deliver it only when you were ready. I think you are now." She placed the envelope in front of him and left. She didn't say anything else. It was that simple. Inside the envelope was a letter from his father. It was different from the others. Written with surprising firmness, it said, "Son, you spent your life wanting to be me. But I spent my life wanting to be someone better because of you. Don't waste your strength protecting lies. Use it to rebuild bridges you've broken." Robert broke down. He cried like a child. For the first time in decades, Linda saw him cry over something real. Linda stood, still shaken. "You betrayed me, Robert. Not just as a sister, but as part of our history. But if you want to do what's right, there's still time." He nodded silently. In the days that followed, Robert began to change. He sold his ego, not the farm. He canceled the contracts, consulted a lawyer, and, to everyone's surprise, voluntarily handed over half of everything to Linda. But the twists and turns didn't stop there. While reviewing the records, the lawyer discovered a sordid detail. There was a hidden beneficiary in the old will, someone Charles had secretly named with part of the land. A name not even Robert knew. It was a small plot of land, separate from the rest, transferred to Grace. The revelation was a shock to everyone. Charles had tried, in his own way, to include his forgotten daughter. And now, the deed loomed like a scar revealed too late. Robert remained silent. Then he simply said, "She deserves it." And then, for the first time, Grace returned to the farm. She arrived empty-handed, but with her heart open. And when Robert saw her, he knelt. She begged for forgiveness. Her voice was choked, but sincere. "I didn't know what I was doing. I was a man trying to save a name. But you're my own flesh and blood." Grace wept. She said she didn't need land or an inheritance. "I just wanted to know I existed." Linda watched them from a distance, her heart at peace. History was rewriting itself before her eyes. Days later, while organizing documents, Linda found a note hidden behind a painting. It was from her father. Short, almost imperceptible. "If you ever forgive your brother, you will have forgiven me too." That closed a cycle. Forgiveness wasn't just between siblings. It was between children and parents, between pasts and futures, between what was and what could still be. But the story of the inheritance still held one final twist. Something no one expected. A detail buried not in the letters, but in the farm's land. And one that would forever change the fate of the Donovan family. It was a Saturday afternoon when Linda, sorting through old papers in the living room, found a yellowed envelope bearing the Macon County Clerk's office seal. The name written in the top corner was familiar. But what caught her attention was the recipient. It wasn't Robert. Or Grace. It was her name. Linda Ann Donovan. For some reason, that document had never been opened. With trembling hands, she broke the seal. Inside was a will much older than all the others. Dated 1987. The handwriting was her father's. And there, among the legal paragraphs and formal terms, it was clearly written, "I leave to my daughter Linda a life interest in the Donovan farm, in recognition of her care, dedication, and sacrifices over the years." Linda didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But turning the last page of the document, she found something even more unexpected. A section had been blacked out. Literally covered in black ink. With a thin blade, she carefully scraped away the dried ink and, little by little, revealed what lay beneath. A name. Grace M. Thompson. Her name had been included, and then crossed out. The ink concealed a moral dilemma etched into the paper. That hit hard. The pain of knowing her father had included her, but also excluded her. It was as if the document screamed his contradictions. Linda took the paper to Grace. They sat on the porch bench and read it together. Grace was silent. "He almost had the courage," she said with a sad smile. "But almost isn't enough, is it?" Linda just held her hand. "Maybe now he is." They decided to take the document to their lawyer. He confirmed its validity but explained that, because it had been erased without legal registration, Grace's passage could not be officially restored. "But it can be symbolically restored," he said. "If Linda voluntarily agrees to share with her what her father didn't have the courage to leave." Linda didn't hesitate. "It's already hers. It always has been." It was that same week that they discovered something buried on the property. Literally. The land mentioned in the old will, the one reserved for Grace, had been used by her father to grow walnut trees. And beneath one of them, Robert had buried a box years ago, at his father's orders, never knowing what was inside. Using a shovel, they dug until they found the metal box. Inside was a single, carefully folded letter, along with a small rag doll. The letter read, "To my forgotten daughter. If the world doesn't recognize you, may this earth embrace you as I never knew how." The doll was made from scraps of fabric from Linda's mother's dress. Charles had created something symbolic. Something that would only be found if time permitted. Grace cried as she picked up the doll. "He saw me. Even too late." Linda put an arm around her sister's shoulders. "And now everyone will see." They decided to keep the plot of land as a memorial. They planted flowers around the walnut tree and placed a bench with a plaque, "Here blooms what was almost forgotten." A space of silence, remembrance, and reconciliation. That same day, as they walked around the back of the farm, Robert approached, quieter than ever. "Father made me promise that if anything happened to him before he could make things right, I would reveal what was hidden in the barn safe." Linda and Grace's eyes met. What else had been left behind? They went to the barn, where the old safe had remained locked for years. Robert, using a key attached to an antique pendant, unlocked the door. Inside were financial documents, but also an envelope with Annabelle's name on it. It was a letter from Charles to his wife. In it, he apologized for everything but also explained that he would never let Grace out of his life, even if he had to hide her. The letter ended with a devastating sentence, "One day, they will meet. And when they do, my soul will rest." Linda read it and felt a strange peace. As if her father had left a trail that, even amid mistakes, led to forgiveness. But a shadow still lingered. Why cross Grace's name out of the will, after so much effort to include her? This answer was on the back of the letter. A hastily scrawled note. I was threatened. They told me that if I officially named her, something would happen to the farm. No one knew who they were. But Robert seemed to understand. He turned pale. I know that note. It was Dad's partner. The one who tried to buy the property secretly. He wanted it all, and used Grace as currency. The story took on a new layer. It wasn't just about family secrets. It was also about hidden agendas. And the name on the partner's contract was someone who would come back to haunt her and try to take what wasn't hers. Linda knew the battle wasn't over yet, and that the biggest confrontation was yet to come. The letter discovered in the safe changed everything. With it came the certainty that someone had manipulated the inheritance behind the scenes. The partner's name, Gerald Whitmore, was listed in old documents as financial advisor to the Donovan estate. But in reality, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. A man who approached Linda's father with promises of stability and much darker intentions. Linda and Grace gathered all the documents. Robert, now more humble, insisted on helping them. I was deceived by him too, he confessed. Whitmore, according to the documents, had indirectly threatened his father, saying that the integrity of the family could be destroyed if he insisted on dividing land with his illegitimate daughter. Charles, weakened by age and guilt, relented. But he left a trail. The case was brought to court. The hearing was scheduled in a small courthouse in Macon. Linda prepared with a heavy heart. He knew it wasn't just about land or money, it was about dignity, about doing the right thing after a life of omissions. And deep down, there was the fear that the truth wouldn't be enough to overcome the manipulation of powerful men. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. People from the town came to watch. The case was already being talked about in the local papers as the broken inheritance. Linda entered with Grace at her side. Robert sat behind them. For the first time, the Donovan siblings were united, still wounded, but standing. Across the way, Gerald Whitmore, with his gray suit and cold smile, seemed unfazed. The judge, a gray-haired man named Thomas Hargrove, listened attentively to both sides. Linda presented the letters, the wills, her mother's diary, the doctored documents, and finally, the threatening note. My father lived divided, but he was never unjust by choice. He was coerced, manipulated, and he paid dearly for it. Her voice trembled, but her soul was firm. Today, we choose the truth. Whitmore laughed mockingly. He claimed the documents were emotions on paper, without legal validity. He said Charles would never trust him with something so serious. But Robert stood. He asked to speak. The judge authorized it. I was an accomplice by omission, and I saw Whitmore force my father to sell parts of the estate, using family secrets as blackmail. I was there. A sharp silence fell over the room. The defense tried to discredit Robert, but the judge called for silence. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman, sitting in the audience, stood up with an envelope in her hands. She was the former secretary of the Macon County Clerk's office, retired years ago. I kept this as a precaution. I didn't know when it would come in handy. But the time has come. She handed the judge an unregistered copy of a will dated 1992. It was the real will, the one that included Grace as the legal heir. It was dated, signed, and notarized. The judge read the document silently, then looked up. God's justice never fails, and sometimes, it just needs time to be revealed. Gerald Whitmore was immediately summoned to answer for fraud, coercion, and attempted extortion. And most symbolic of all, he lost the right to purchase any property associated with the Donovan name. In the courthouse hallway, Linda hugged Grace tightly. Robert, crying, said, "Our father is finally at rest." It was as if every generation of the family was there, breathing their first sigh of relief. But there was still one step to be taken, deciding what to do with the land that now officially belonged to Linda and Grace. A symbol of the past and the future. They returned to the farm and sat under the walnut tree at the small memorial. The sun was setting, and the golden sky seemed to bless this new chapter. "What now?" Grace asked. Linda smiled. "Now we plant." They decided to create a welcoming space for older women experiencing abandonment. A retreat. A refuge. a living response to the pain they had carried for years. The project was given a prayerful name, Annabel's Grace. A fusion of two women who represented love, sacrifice, and redemption. And as they began renovating the old stables, Robert appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers. "I think the farm is more alive now than it ever was." Linda smiled. "Because now, it belongs to the truth." And even with all peace restored, there was one last letter to be read. A letter forgotten among the court papers, sealed with red wax. It was addressed to Linda, written in Charles's own handwriting, but the handwriting seemed different. More urgent. More confessional. And the words written there would further shake the foundations of the Donovan family's history. Linda sat alone in the living room of the old house, the sealed letter in her hands. The red wax bore the ancient Donovan family crest, used only on special occasions. The envelope was yellowed but intact. Her heart was pounding, as if something deep was about to emerge. Carefully, she broke the seal and pulled out the folded paper. Her father's handwriting was familiar but shaky, as if it had been written in the last days of his life. "If you are reading this, my daughter, it is because truth has triumphed over silence." Thus began Charles Donovan's final letter. "I kept secrets to protect you, but I discovered too late that protecting is not the same as loving." Linda felt tears fall. The words were heavy with regret. But there was more. Much more. And what came next would leave eternal scars. In the letter, Charles revealed a promise he had made to his wife Annabel years earlier, to protect the family's memory at all costs. "She made me swear that if Grace's story ever came to light, I would tell her everything. But I failed. I wasn't strong enough." Linda stopped reading. He looked up at the living room ceiling. It was as if his father's soul was still there, begging for forgiveness. But then came the sentence that would change everything. "Linda, you need to know. Grace isn't just your half-sister. She's also your half-sister." Linda's eyes widened. The world spun. The paper nearly slipped from her hands. "Before marrying me, your mother got pregnant by a man who abandoned her. I met her while she was pregnant. I accepted Grace as my own, but she decided that the girl would be raised far away, so we could start from scratch." The revelation was devastating. Grace was Annabel's biological daughter. And Charles had raised Linda as an only child, silently carrying the choice to protect his wife's honor and the family's reputation. Linda felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew was being rewritten in a few lines. And now it all made sense. Her mother's gaze. Margot's silence. The hidden letters. With her hands still shaking, Linda ran to her mother's old trunk. She rummaged through her belongings, as if searching for confirmation. At the bottom of the drawer, she found an old photograph, a young, pregnant Annabel, holding the hand of a dark-haired woman, Margot. On the back was written, "We started out apart, but one day, our daughters will be united." It was an unspoken prophecy, a hope whispered through tears. The next day, Linda drove to Asheville again. He found Grace in the garden, watering the rose bushes. Without a word, he handed her the letter and the photo. Grace read it slowly. Her eyes filled with tears. "She was my mother." "Really?" Linda nodded, a lump in her throat. "She loved you. Very much. But she chose silence." The two embraced right there, surrounded by flowers and longing. In the days that followed, the sisters decided to transform the farm into more than a retreat. They created a support center for women who had children out of wedlock and were forced into silence. They called it Annabel and Margot House, a place of healing, truth, and new beginnings. Robert helped with the renovation. Even Gerald Whitmore, by court order, had to contribute financially to the project as part of his compensation. On the day of the inauguration, Linda took the stage set up under the ancient walnut tree and gave a speech. For many years, this land was marked by secrets. But today, it is a land of revelations, forgiveness, and hope. This house exists because two women chose love over shame, and because two daughters decided to break the cycle of silence. The audience gave a standing ovation. During the ceremony, a woman approached Linda and whispered, "Your father would be proud." Linda looked up at the sky. "I hope he is, but more than that, I hope he's finally found peace." The woman smiled. Sometimes God only reveals the full picture when the frame is already broken. And Linda knew it was true. Not all families are born ready. Some are stitched together over time. Later, while sorting through souvenirs in her mother's study, she found a final entry in Annabelle's journal. "If you ever find out everything, please love your sister as I would." Linda closed the journal, her eyes brimming with tears. Promise kept, Mommy. And in that moment, she felt a gentle breeze pass by, like a whisper of approval from heaven. But just as the story seemed to finally have found rest, a phone call would change the course of events. It was from the family lawyer. He had found another letter. But this one wasn't from Charles or Annabelle. It was from someone no one knew existed. And this new voice from the past could open a new chapter in the Donovan story. The Donovan family story has shown us that the truth doesn't always come when we want it to, but it always comes when we're ready. Linda, Grace, Annabelle, Margot, each, in their own way, faced the weight of silence, the pain of rejection, and the challenge of forgiveness. But together, they transformed a past full of hurt into a present full of purpose. And now, it's up to you. How many times have you kept a secret for fear of hurting someone? How many times has silence felt safer than the truth? What if today were the day to free your soul from everything that holds you back? What do you still need to forgive? Who do you still need to listen to with an open heart? This story is about love, yes, but not the romantic love scene in movies. It's real love. The love that endures betrayal, faces judgment, breaks traditions, and mends pieces. The love that comes from God, that is greater than our mistakes and stronger than our fears. The love that transforms shame into testimony. And maybe right now you're thinking of someone. A brother. A daughter. A mother. A truth that's been stuck in time. So reflect, which part of this story touched your heart the most? What would you do if you were in Linda's shoes? Or Grace's? Or even Robert's? Write here in the comments. I read each message with care. Tell me, have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Or maybe, are you waiting for this forgiveness? Now is the time. God didn't bring you here by chance. And before you go, I want to ask you very kindly, if this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This really helps me to continue telling stories like this, which speak to the soul, and perhaps, to your past too. May God bless you with discernment, courage, and faith. Because, as Psalm 30 verse 5 says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And your morning can begin now.